In the future, I think that we'll have a very different type of globalization. And by the future, I mean in the next few years, where advanced communication technology, and especially machine translation, makes it possible for people to export labor services without actually leaving the country. My book is trying to explain how globalization has changed over time. And the Great Convergence is focusing on the nature of globalization since the ICT revolution around 1990. And before that, there was a great divergence as the today's rich countries industrialized and saw growth much faster than the developing countries. And that went on from something like 1820 to 1900. From 1900 till now, there's been a fall in the global shares of the G7 and a deindustrialization of the G7 and an industrialization of the developing countries. So that's the kind of convergence. And I explain how the role of information technology changed the nature of globalization, because it wasn't just making it easier for goods to cross borders, it also made it easy for know-how to cross borders. And that allowed companies to sort of combine high technology and low wages in a way that really changed the nature of competition in manufacturing especially. So I think globalization is accelerating in different ways. So I like to think of the old globalization was about goods made here, sold there. There's plenty of that. Brazil, Colombia, lots and lots of countries do make things here and sell it there. The second, or the new globalization, is more like this global value chain things going on where parts are going back and forth. Both of those types are continuing, and I don't see them slowing down, but especially global value chains, maybe not accelerating. In the future, though, I think that we'll have a very different type of globalization. And by the future, I mean in the next few years, where advanced communication technology, and especially machine translation, makes it possible for people to export labor services without actually leaving the country. So it's like telecommuting, but just international. Or you might call it telemigration, because in essence you're moving to work in an office without actually going there. And I think that will happen relatively quickly because of the rapid advance of digital technology, communication in particular, but also processing speed. I think the digital divide is disappearing quite rapidly. The digital divide, I think, is a concept of a few years ago. Now, there is a problem of connectivity in Africa, but I think that's fading somewhat. But the idea that the rich countries are getting into tech and the poor countries aren't, I think that's replaced more like many of the developing countries have leapfrogged the entire fixed phone system. They've leapfrogged consumer banks and going directly into e-commerce on cell phones and things like that. So the digital divide, I think, was a big story 10 years ago. Going forward, I think that the advanced communication in particular will allow them to export their services more than they would before. So I think it's an opportunity for many of the developing countries who weren't part of this new globalization, weren't part of the global value chain revolution, so to speak. AI, artificial intelligence, is enabling many things. And my view is that it will at first be mostly separate from globalization, but in many ways it will enable it. What I sort of think is going to happen is that people working, telecommuting, will combine with these algorithms to get things done. Because just take, for example, checking into a hotel. Some of that can be automated, and you need some people in place, but you could also have some people on the screens. So instead of waiting with 3 lines, you could have 5 lines. 2 of them were real people, 3 of them were screens of people who were somewhere else working for much less, and they're all working together with AI to make it possible. So I view them as somewhat complementary, at least in the longer run. But the primary thing for globalization, I think, is it's enabling direct provision of services. I guess we could say that AI will help with things like e-commerce, and Alibaba and eBay. Those are creating real trading goods, and in some sense those are enabled by the algorithms. There's a role for AI in everything. So, but let me just say about AI. I think AI is a bad word. We shouldn't call it artificial intelligence. We should call it almost intelligent. Because what it actually is pattern recognition. It's database pattern recognition. So if you have a data set where it's what the issues are clear, like it could be this is a photo, who's in it, and the outcomes are clear, where you can say this is who it was. Now we have the computing power to estimate these statistical models to do very, very good at that. And whether it's language translation, natural language processing, as long as we have the big data, it does that. But these things are very specific. So for example, the Facebook can recognize faces way better than most people. But if you took that same thing and pointed to the sky and say, what is a cloud and what's a plane, it would have no idea. Or another one of my favorite examples is AlphaGo that beat the world's best player in Go this year. And so I was at a panel in Davos, and they asked the guys, well, what would happen if the board was 29 by 29 instead of 19 by 19? And they go, oh, we would have been totally lost. So you see, this thing doesn't actually know how to play the game. It just recognizes patterns in an inhumanly fast way. So that's why I think it will enter into everything where there's database pattern recognition. And as everything's being digitized and we're doing so much online, we're gathering the structured data sets we need, so it'll become part and parcel of basically everything we do. And again, what I say, AI is AI until you use it enough, then it doesn't be AI. Spell checking in Word, that's AI. You misspell a word and it's trying to guess what you meant, and it makes a suggestion. And now I don't know if you've seen it, but it underlines with gold where it thinks you're too wordy or misplaced a word. That's AI. But nobody thinks of it that as AI, it's just a feature. So that will eventually come shot into absolutely everything we do, and we won't even know it. The future of jobs, very disrupted. So it's really a completely different story in the rich countries and the poor countries. So the way I view this future globalization is allowing an arbitrage of wages internationally. And as you well know, the wages are often 20 to 1 or 10 to 1 for quite similar things in different countries. Now, what that means is that the people who are working, let's say a nurse, a doctor, an accountant in, say, Kenya, will earn more than they would otherwise, and so it'll all be great for them. It won't be disruption, it'll be just the opposite. In the rich countries, where people will be replaced by lower wage workers, it will be relatively disrupted. So for the rich countries, I think of this as very disruptive, and I think I didn't really say it yet, but it's important to say that this is happening in the service sector, not the manufacturing and the agricultural sector. And up to now, globalization and automation have been primarily in jobs where you make things. And when you think things or say things or work with ideas, globalization and automation hasn't really happened, and that's what it's coming for. So I think basically we'll have to go to jobs here in the rich countries where it's really important that you're actually there and you're using humanity as an edge, empathy, creativity, understanding groups, things like that, being flexible, looking at the situation, judgment. I think the jobs of the future are in the rich countries will people who can do that at the same time as leveraging the benefits of AI and this kind of remote intelligence. Now, if you like, I think it's very much what companies like Google do. There's very few people who work for Google, given how large they are. And those people who are there, they're totally bought into the team, and they're putting together remote teams. They're using AI to do all sorts of things. So that's what I kind of view the jobs of the future as being, people can put it together. Already there's a number of online websites which allow the mixing and matching of this. So think about it as international freelancing. And there's one in the Philippines I was reading about where they've set up a website to help advertise Filipino freelancers to be abroad. And I think governments should do that. I think the government should do like trade fairs, but for their service sector employees. Set up platforms so people can hire their people directly. There's big commercial ones that are working on it, but I think that is one way to help. Probably would also help if there was some sort of certification or verification, some kind of like TripAdvisor, so you'd know who to trust. You go to the Tanzanian website and you want to hire a personal assistant, and the government could provide some sort of stamp of approval or something like that that would help you overcome some of the information problems. Well, blockchain is a technology, and everybody's talking about it now, but I'm quite sure in 5 or 10 years it will be baked into many things we do, and we won't even talk about it. It would be like talking about some protocol in digital things. So blockchain is a way of signing contracts, in essence, at least applied to this, in a way that's verifiable, distributed, and completely transparent. And we've got this, most people think about blockchain in terms of Bitcoin, where the whole thing is to reduce transparency. But the most use of Bitcoin is everybody knows what everybody did and the records everywhere. So that will make trade much easier. And it's already come into, for instance, money transfer. There's lots of companies. I was on a panel with a guy in Bangkok fairly recently, where they transfer at a tenth of the price of the Western Union by using blockchain. Because once everybody's written this down, everybody knows it was actually transmitted, so it's all fast and verifiable. So I think it's essentially a way of reducing transactions and contracting, and we will see it. I mean, it will be so widespread you won't even know it's there. There's this wonderful law that in the beginning you know about the technology, afterwards you stop calling it, like artificial intelligence. Everything's artificial intelligence until we get used to it, then it's just a feature. So blockchain will become a feature in almost all the transactions we do, in my view. I think this technology is relatively cheap and people are picking it up very quick. So one of the interesting things about this phase of innovation we have, it's what I call Varian's law. So the chief economist of Google has created this law where he says, real innovation happens when a set of components become available. And back in the Industrial Revolution, it was light bulbs, electric motors, and people made great products by recombining the components. Now the different thing here is these components are free. Most of the protocols are free. Many of the software are open software, and people are putting together stuff, making valuable products from free components. So I don't think we actually need this huge effort to get it out there. In fact, people are putting it together quite rapidly, even in developing countries. So I don't view that as a huge thing. Maybe what you'd need is to make sure that the whole world's cabled with fast fiber cable to sort of enable the thing. But people are, it's really a distributed kind of technology. If you have a smartphone, a laptop, a tablet, and good connectivity, you're off to the races. And so that's why I don't think we need, it's not like industry. It's not as clumpy, it's not as agglomerated as industry. So that's what I would view it. This third wave of globalization, or the service sector globalization, I think will be very much like eBay. Small sellers, small buyers. And we will no longer need massive multinational corporations. We will not need these big, huge marketplaces, because it'll be just somebody getting online and helping you sort out your PowerPoints, formatting them, or helping you with an Excel spreadsheet, or taking care of your expenses. And this can be done quite distributed. So I think it will actually create a new path for development for many developing countries. Path that will look like Costa Rica, not Thailand. And so that's the way. Services they don't have the same scale economies, the same agglomeration, so it tends to act very different. So my personal view is that this will allow the emerging market miracle to continue and spread much beyond where it is now. I think people are in denial of how fast this is going to happen. So lots of people do not know it's happening. But once you start listening to it, you see it on the news feeds every single day, and you go, oh my goodness. And even the people are informed. I was talking to the whole board of Stan Chart, for example, completely informed people. But it's just happening so fast, people aren't ready for how fast it's happening. So it's really, really important.